Commissioner Jordan?
Jim, you need to unmute yourself.
All right,
Jim.
that works.
Jim, we can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself, Jim.
That would be *6, Jim.
Yeah, *6, Jim. Thank you, George. Glad you're there.
Okay.
Oh, there you are.
Got it. Thank you.
You're here?
Yes.
Cool. Commissioner Powell.
Here.
Okay.
And Commissioner Renner.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this. And at this point, before we do public comment, I just wanted to say a few things on the circumstances. And that is, certainly the greatest responsibility for government is the protection of the health and safety of its citizens. Our community is, frankly, at this point, is in a health crisis. The McLean County Health Department, even though they've been shackled in terms of enforcement by the state's attorney's opinions, has reported that 94% of our ICU beds are in use and 91% of our total hospital beds are full. On November 13th, the department reported 120 new cases of COVID and a rolling positivity rate of 10.6%. In mid-November, the New York Times listed McLean County as number 3 of metro areas in the country where COVID-19 rates were increasing the fastest. And if we contrast this situation with what happened even just a few months ago in July, on July 13th, the county health department reported only 6 new cases of COVID and a positivity rate of 2.2%. Our liquor code requires that liquor licensees comply with all codes and regulations pertaining to health and safety applicable in the city of Bloomington. There are 2 sets of rules, however, that apply to liquor establishments. The first are the emergency rules promulgated by the Illinois Department of Public Health. They require, among other things, that all employees and customers in the establishments wear face coverings with the limited exception of when they're eating and drinking. We have been enforcing these rules since at least Labor Day weekend, and I know there's been some confusion about enforcement. That's one thing we've been doing from the very beginning, is enforcing the face covering requirement. We've also been enforcing these rules, we'll continue to enforce these rules where applicable. One establishment today will be acknowledging that the rules were violated last weekend and paying a fine, and we'll hear more about that in a moment. The second set of rules have been enacted since early November that result from the governor's disaster proclamation, an executive order passed pursuant to that proclamation in response to the worsening health crisis throughout our region, the entire state, and throughout the country. Now, these emergency regulations prohibit on-premises eating and drinking and require that all premises will be closed by 11 p.m. The complaints that were filed that summoned all of you here today are related to these emergency executive orders. Going forward, the city will be enforcing these through liquor license enforcement procedures, which is our primary tool of enforcement. Other means of enforcement that are more broad include those that the health department does possess. And I'll mention that in a few minutes, in spite of, unfortunately, our state's attorneys' extremely narrow, ideological, and extremely partisan views on this. Going forward, the city will be enforcing these, but in preparing today's proceedings, and I want to thank the city staff has had several discussions with representatives of the establishments involved, and that's happened throughout the week. Those discussions indicate that prior to the filing, there had been confusion as to whether the city would enforce these executive orders. Again, we're living in stressful times, extremely unprecedented times, really. And we're having difficulty and a lot of challenges in deciding how to cope with these changing circumstances. There's stress that comes from concerns about safety, obviously about economic well-being among small business owners or large business owners, as well as employees, social unrest, and obviously political divisions that, for whatever reason, seem to be resulting from this health crisis. Probably some of the stress has contributed to the misunderstanding and confusion regarding our enforcement of these health regulations. In an effort to try to be as fair and equitable as possible, we will proceed as we proceed going forward. I want to state that we are not going to take action today to enforce the complaints, but we want to unequivocally say that going forward, we will be enforcing through our liquor licensing procedures, the prohibition of on-premises consumption and the requirement that all establishments be closed by 11 o'clock. Now, with respect to the tools of enforcement, the state is clearly overwhelmed at this point, and I know there's confusion by any business person who's involved would have conflicting directives or signals, perhaps from the state, here at the local level, as well as our county health department. Now, the city's primary tool for enforcement is through liquor license violations. And in many ways, that's unfortunate, because if people don't have a liquor license, then they wouldn't be here today, even if we knew that there were violations. And this is why we have to rely on, we can't rely on the state because they're overwhelmed, but on our county's health department. And there is the latest from the Illinois Municipal League. And Brad Cole, who's the president of the Illinois Municipal League and a former mayor of Carbondale, actually, said, if an establishment violating the provisions of the governor's executive orders, other than social distancing and face coverings, it is the responsibility of local public health departments, and I say this, Mr. Knapp, our state's attorney, please pay attention. It is the responsibility of local public health departments for enforcement, education, and potential closure orders. That's regardless of whether they have liquor licenses. The Illinois Municipal League recommends that local law enforcement work through the ISP as usual regarding the enforcement of the state's mitigations. And at this point, the health department, this is the dirty little secret that I'm the first person who's blowing this open in public. Our state's attorney has put into shackles. Our health department has prevented the enforcement across the board of the powers that the health department has. It's quite clear. And the Illinois Municipal League has made that quite clear. You cannot make decisions if you are a state's attorney based on your extreme partisan and extreme ideological views. You've got to make decisions based upon what's best for your community. And so I call upon the newly elected McLean County Board that'll be seated December 1st to put pressure not only on the state's attorney, but the health department to make sure that they do their job beyond what they've been. They've certainly done a great job of tracking things, but in terms of enforcement, the state's attorney's opinions exist, frankly, only in the state's attorney's mind, not out here in the real world. We've got a real public health crisis, and there's no excuse for why we would be in the top 10 in the entire country for spiking. One of the major reasons, not the only one, is we've got a state's attorney who has stopped the health department from doing its job. Mr. State's Attorney, do your job so that the health department can do their job and protect our citizens. Now, in our particular mode, our tools are broad, but they're only confined to establishments that have liquor licenses, which frankly is not fair. But we have to deal with the cards that we're dealt. And given that, at this point, there's been a lot of confusion. A little over a month ago, I did send a letter, as did Mayor Coos, to the governor. At that time, again, we got to understand the circumstances at that time. We did not have a spike. We did not seem we seemed to be okay, if not at least stabilizing. And we asked that the new restrictions that were put upon us be reconsidered by the governor's office in light of the fact that we were stable, but other communities in our region were not. Now, obviously, that's a moot point today. Nobody would make that argument or send that kind of a letter today. That's a letter that both Mayor Coos and I sent about a month ago in light of those circumstances. I think in many cases that sent perhaps an inarticulate message to many who thought that, oh, well, we're not going to be enforcing things. In a couple of media interviews, I did say, we do not have the police to go door to door, business by business, to track down these things. But if we know that things have happened and we have complaints where people bring these things to fore, then obviously we have to act. So I do want to apologize for the miscommunication, the inarticulate communication of the past. We're going to try to do everything possible moving forward to make sure that doesn't happen. But the one thing we do have to understand is we're dealing with a moving target. Who knows what will be happening in a month or 2 months from now? Dr. Fauci was on National Public Radio 2 days ago, said that he expects the vaccines to start to be implemented by the end of December. It'll take 6 months, but we can be hopeful. But in the meantime, we have to protect the health and safety of our community. And that's a critical public trust. At this point, Mr. Boyle, do you want to say anything, or should I go to public comment first before I turn over to you?
Well, I just wanted to emphasize that in order to be clear and in response and to the confusion that was expressed by some of the licensees, there will not at this point be any further action on the complaints that have been filed, but that going forward, we will, and we want to be very clear about this, we will be enforcing the regulations from the governor dealing with the prohibition of on-premise consumption and the closing of establishments by 11 p.m.
Right.
In addition to any other pertinent health regulations in effect and applicable in Bloomington.
Thank you, Mr.
Now,
Boyle.
also, Mayor, you had
Okay.
asked, this would almost come under perhaps the rubric of new business, but just in terms of announcing with respect to the compliance aspects, there was an establishment that pled to 2 violations of the regulations as they pertain to the wearing of face coverings. That was on November 13th and 14th of last week. Well, obviously November 13th and 14th was last week. That establishment is Daddy-O's at 527 North Main, and they have been fined and agreed to pay a fine of $500 for that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Boyle. And again, the main thing that we want to ensure is, in order to promote public safety and health, we want to encourage compliance. I don't think anybody's here. I hope everybody understands. We're not here to try to nitpick. We're trying to make sure that we move forward in a compliant way, given our regional and national circumstances. Hopefully these things will begin to improve. And certainly our small businesses are obviously the background, the backbone of our community. And they're hiring lots of people. As mayor, you got to look people in the eye who own public businesses and say, this is why we're doing this, or people who've lost their jobs or got laid off because of what's happening. And so we don't want that to happen as much as we can, if we can do anything about that. We definitely are in conversation about it is in terms of policies. This is not related to liquor necessarily, but about how we might be able to ameliorate some of the financial stress upon our local businesses. We did have a $4,500 grant program, which the funds were expended rather quickly, and also to individuals who were in extreme stress. And we're talking about that again moving forward. Mr. Boyle, did you want to follow up with something?
Well, I just wanted to also say, Mayor, that in the discussions we've had with the licensees and with businesses throughout the area, the vast majority are more than willing to do their part, and do, in fact, do their part to comply with the regulations that are often changing, and that can cause them some pain, but they've been more than willing to step up and to really do their part and to comply.
And just, I'm sorry, George.
Those that aren't are a small minority. That's what I'm saying.
Well, just to clarify, and I know I was interviewed a couple of times. This is about a month ago by some of our television stations, and I did say we don't have the ability in our police force to go and knock on everybody's door who's a business person, go door to door and check in and poke in terms of enforcement. So we are reliant on mostly voluntary compliance. But when we have a complaint or we have situations where officers do note things, then we are obligated or have been. So moving forward, I just want to make that clear that irrespective of what's happened in the past, as long as we're in the situation that we're in, we're going to have to enforce these orders to protect public safety. Mr. Boyle, did you want to add to that?
Nothing further on that, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm not Your Honor, I'm the mayor. Everything's my fault. So at this point,
I got a little court reminiscence there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just teasing you, as you know, George. But at this point, I do want to move to public comment, and then any other thoughts that my liquor commissioners might have or observations. Is there any public comment, Madam Clerk?
We have not had anyone register for in-person public comment. We did have one emailed public comment. I'd like to state the name for the record. Jeff.
Please do. Thank you.
Jeff Callahan emailed public comment.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Boyle, at this point, it's not listed on the agenda. Can I open? Should I? Is there open it up to any of the people who are online who want to say anything, or is that inappropriate given our rules?
I think if people wish to make comments, provided they go by the public comment rules of say 3 minutes, because we've this is not an evidentiary hearing at this point, and nor is there really any contest before them.
Okay.
But actually, if I could, I know Mr. Rinker is on. He's an attorney representing Daddy-O's, and I wanted to just verify with him that, in fact, there is the agreement I alluded to earlier with respect to face coverings on the 2 days.
I don't see, is Mr. Rinker on? Oh, Mr. Rinker, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Anything that you want to add or clarify, sir?
No, I mean, I did speak with Mr. Boyle earlier today. We do acknowledge receipt of the newest complaint and citation, which was referenced earlier in his comment, and as indicated, would enter a no contest deal with respect to the findings of fact and order, which has been presented.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and turn to my excuse me. Is there anyone else who wants to? I'm sorry, Mr. Rinker. Anybody else who wants to make a comment who's online with us right now? Obviously, if you're online, we're going to do it. Mr. Bentley, I see your hand up. You have up to 3 minutes, Mr. Bentley. Go ahead. You need to unmute yourself, though, Mr. Bentley.
Is that good now?
Yeah, we hear you. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Bentley.
Mayor, I'm looking for some more clarity on the description, as it wasn't given the last time on Labor Day when the Bloomington Police Department issued me a order to cease and desist only because people were sitting at tables with food and beverage in front of them, and your Bloomington Police Department decided to issue an order to cease and desist, which I had customers leave my establishment because they were unclear with what your direction was to be. No one has ever addressed the fact that maybe we made a mistake in the Bloomington Police Department's interpretation. So my question is, you're wanting us to follow all these directions that the governor's put down. What does that mean with respect to, is the Bloomington Police Department going to be going around checking people? As you said, they're going to be responding to complaints. I can tell you via the health department, no complaint was ever filed on me. The Bloomington Police Department actually took it upon themselves to check my establishment on the 13th to see that I was open after 11 p.m. And they filed the complaint with the McLean County Health Department. Will that be the protocol with the Bloomington Police Department? If I would call in there and say there's a restaurant open with inside dining, will they be directed to go to that facility, witness it, and file that complaint with the McLean County Health Department? And with all these stipulations, with all this, it's even saying, and I need some clarity on this, that we are supposed to be taking reservations for people to come in, which is very hard for a bar establishment. And anyone that just wants to walk in, we're supposed to get a name from one of the people in the party for the contact tracing in case someone does have it in that party later down the line. How far are we really wanting to go here? And the undue hardship put on me is totally different than the undue hardship put on Walmart and all these other big box stores. So hopefully we're going to take into consideration the financial impact that all this is coming on to me as a small business owner. At some point in time, is somebody going to make a judgment call for the undue hardship to the small business people versus the big box stores? And we're all looking for this clarity, especially me, that I've been kind of the crosshairs, it seems, for not doing anything wrong. And I have been speaking with Mr. Boyle, has been very helpful. The health department has been very helpful in trying to explain things to me. It seems that possibly the liquor commissioner hasn't been very clear in directing the police department what they're really supposed to be doing and what their definition and interpretation is. I was even told by the police department that I should have my customers sign a medical affirmation stating they have a medical condition. If I would not have questioned that police officer to show me that, I would have been having people sign medical waivers. And that's a direct violation of a HIPAA law. So I need, and I think everybody else here on this panel wants to know what exactly and how far the extent we need to be taking for reservations.
Mr. Bentley?
Track, yes.
We had asked to keep the comments to 3 minutes. I will tell you this, as you know, you and I spoke over an hour. 2 days ago, we spoke several minutes today. The legal department's always available to give some assistance and guidance. We're going to a number of issues here, so please feel free to contact us and we can get a response. But
absolutely,
I think you're well over your 3 minutes.
That's all. If my time is up, that's fine.
I wanted to make sure that we heard whatever you need, Mr. Bentley. Now I'm going to turn to Mr. Boyle in a second, but Mr. Bentley, I certainly would not expect anybody that doesn't even seem reasonable to me who's conducting a business to have people fill out forms like that as they walk in the door. But the two ways that we are aware of incidents would be because police officers have that information by virtue of their routine inspections, and also if there are formal complaints. And so those are the two things that we're going to continue to rely on. We're not going to try to triple our police force and go to everybody's establishment several times a day or night and to see what they're doing. But Mr. Boyle, did you want to add anything else that I'm missing there? I mean, those aren't, is that a fair statement to say those are two ways?
And those are the two ways, either for observation or for the complaint.
Right.
And with respect to some of the other things, we're certainly available to discuss things. And the Labor Day situation is a case that was already before the commission, and it was an agreed decision in order.
Right.
And I'm willing to speak with Mr. Bentley at any time about that.
Thanks, Mr. Bentley. And we obviously appreciate all of your investments in our community. And I'm sorry if there's continues to be miscommunication, but if we can try to, that's part of what we're trying to, I'm hoping we can do today is leave here understanding this is where we are, which is not where any of us thought, I don't think any of us thought we would be here several weeks ago. Anyone else have a public comment?
Mr. Mayor, this is Tom DeVore. I represent one of the potential complainants. If I could,
of course,
have
Tom. Mr. DeVore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. As you're aware, my name is Tom DeVore. And before I started, I say, Mayor, I appreciate everything you said about these unprecedented extreme times, at least in our lifetime. Pandemics aren't new to our civilization, but at least for most of us, it is. A few points I want to make. When you talk about we're in the top 10 as far as positivity, but we have strict measures, I'd ask you guys to consider some studies that have been done that suggest that when people are forced out of bars and restaurants to where we have these compliances in place for masks, social distancing, et cetera, people are social creatures. And when they can't meet and congregate in these controlled environments, they do it in their homes where most of the positivity is coming from. So I would, again, Mr. Mayor, just ask you to consider whether there's an adverse impact from what you're trying to accomplish. Let me move on. And again, there's studies that support that, sir. I just ask you to consider that. The issue of your state's attorney, you guys know, most of you that know who I am, I know George does. I've been across this state. And when you talk about the frustrations of your state's attorney not doing health department measures, they're broad, Mr. Mayor, I agree. You would be surprised to know that in the 102 counties we have right now, that only 2 or 3 state's attorneys in the whole county, regardless of political affiliation, have ever taken efforts to try to close anybody down under the law of the Department of Health Act. 2 or 3 only across the state. That's not a political thing, Mr. Mayor. You should know that the appellate prosecutor's office back in April sent out a letter to all state's attorneys. Appellate prosecutors are not partisan. And they said, state's attorneys, be careful with trying to enforce executive orders through the Department of Health Act, because you could be subjecting yourself and your county to federal civil rights violations. Keep that in mind, potentially. The issue, I've read the complaints, sir, Mr. Mayor, and I understand. I know you want to look for a way to protect people. I can respect that. It's unfortunate that our legislature hasn't met to give you some more tools to try to do that, and you're trying to use what you can. It's tough. I get it. It's tough for your health department because the law that they would have to follow, your state's attorney, and again, it's not political coming from me, sir. Your state's attorney probably knows they can't prove what the law requires to shut somebody down because you have to have facts specific to that location. Regulations, your regulation that you enforced against some of your businesses for mask or capacity limits, that's a real regulation. Regulation, sir, are a defined term. It's a rule. Rule and regulation is interchangeable. Rules are created by administrative bodies through the JCAR process. An executive order is not a rule or a regulation, sir. So again, if you're going to try to go down that path, unfortunately, we're going to have a lot of complications, and we'll just have to address it as we come. But I had asked you to talk to Mr. Boyle about what's coming if you want to try to call a executive order a regulation and enforce it through your liquor ordinance. I can tell you in every county and every city I deal with, not one has tried that yet. You would be the first to even try it. So that's, and again, if you're trying to accomplish keeping people safe, which I respect, and doing it through only your liquor process, if I have a client and you try to say, look, the regulation being the executive order, again, you know my concerns about that, and then you try to suspend a license, my client's just going to appeal to the state commission, and when they appeal to the state commission, they're going to be reinstated under their liquor license at the state level and will operate for weeks and months while that appeal process is pending. So I understand you're looking for a way to keep people safe. I respect that, sir, as much as anything. Just you're looking for a way to do that, again, that I think is unprecedented. I'm not so sure how effective it's going to be if your businesses decide to appeal those local decisions by your commission. So keep that in mind. And again, sir, I seriously ask you to consider, do you want the people of your community sitting in a controlled environment where masks are being worn, social distancing is being followed, capacity limits, etc.? Do you want your citizens there, or do you want them sitting inside each other's homes congregating? I assure you they're going to go. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boyle. Just wanted to clarify before I turn to you, Mr. Boyle. Just want to say, I certainly appreciate your points. What you've mentioned is precisely the reason why we are not moving. We're not even having fines at this point and not pursuing 11 of the 12 complaints, because certainly I've had experience enough in almost 8 years as being mayor, where if something is appealed to the state, who knows? One of the situations we had took over a year, and at that point, presumably we'll have vaccines. And
I hope so, sir.
I hope so. No idea. I certainly hope so as well. So that is definitely something that's not lost upon me for sure. And that's why what we really want is compliance and promoting public safety. Mr. Boyle, you want to say something? Go ahead, sir.
Yes, just a couple of points. And I know that generally with public comment, we don't respond. It's just a little bit of a hybrid hearing, and we are talking about clarity. Mr. DeVore and I spoke briefly about this afternoon, and we had the opportunity to speak several times with respect to the Cadillac Jacks set of hearings in early September. The city's position is not unique, and it is somewhat new, and I'll tell you one reason why with respect to the interpretation of the emergence of the executive orders. The executive orders were issued November 3rd, so they're new in themselves. But the issues relating to them have been litigated, and in a recently published decision on November 13th called the Foxfire Tavern versus Pritzker decision, which was published last, as I say, on November 13th. the proclamations and the executive orders were upheld. Now, Mr. DeVore and I may have a difference of opinion, and I have to say we've had some very collegial and useful discussions about those differences of opinion. With respect to the idea that the use of the Liquor Commission power would result in an appeal that would delay any enforcement, I might point out that liquor commissioners do have an ability to close an establishment for 7 days, and in fact, the mayor of Champaign did do that. It would depend on the circumstances, of course, and whether the facts warranted the legal action. And that in a number, when there's more than one violation, some of those stays that Mr. DeVore alluded to, in effect, do not exist. So for second and third violations within a 12-month period, those don't exist. So our hope is that really we can get voluntary compliance and understanding, and that we can work together towards putting an end to this crisis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Boyle. And just to address both Mr. DeVore and Mr. Boyle, absolutely. This does nobody any good for us to have these kinds of meetings. We really would like to have as close to voluntary compliance as we can. And just in terms of the state's attorney, I just want to clarify, it's not that I was expecting the state's attorney to directly bring suits, but the very narrow legal opinions of our state's attorney have put our health department, and most all of us who are involved in this know that. It's kind of like the emperor's new clothes. The emperor has no clothes on. And that is, we know what's going on, and that the health department, while they're doing a great job in education, et cetera, they've basically been castrated in terms of any kind of enforcement, and they have more enforcement powers than we do. Because
understand, I just wanted to point out to you, sir, that that's not, again, I'm not into the politics of your county. I respect everybody. I just was wanting to point out that that's not unique to your county state's attorney. That's a widely held view. So that's, again, for what it's worth. I know it doesn't mean anything.
Sure. No, I understand that. And that's one of the reasons why I quoted I'm assuming widely held view by the Illinois Municipal League, that the health departments have that duty and responsibility and moral and legal obligation. Whether that's challenged in court at some later point is another question. But right now, if we could get the health department in McLean County to help and do some of the lifting in places, especially that do not have liquor licenses, that seems to me to be quite helpful. I'm going to just very briefly. Thank you, Mr. DeVore.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
May I speak?
I'm sorry. Who's
Tyler Holloway.
Oh, Tyler. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, I need to put my glasses on, Tyler. Sorry.
That's all right. It's kind of dark in here.
I don't see you. Where are you? Oh, there you are, Tyler. Go ahead. Sure, of course.
No problem.
You have up to 3 minutes. Go ahead, Tyler.
All I wanted to ask, and I spoke to George Boyle about this earlier this afternoon. You know, I'm in a unique position to where I have windows that open, and in the previous phase in the summer, they consider that outdoor seating. Is that still considered outdoor seating? Because George said that he didn't know for sure, but he said they were just enacting the phase from before.
Well, that's a good question, Tyler, because I know Butch had that same question at Reality Bites. Mr. Boyle,
we did some
updates?
research on that, and we will be sending you some guidance on that as soon as we get off the phone call here.
Good question, Tyler.
Information?
Yeah.
So with regard to any of those questions with respect to implementation, a couple things. First of all, and Tyler did get a hold of me about that, and I was telling him we were looking at the regs and as they applied to the description that he was giving me of his situation. So we will be able to provide him with information, and may even do so before the end of the phone call if, depending on my colleagues here. But otherwise, I'll be sending them, Tyler, as soon as we get done, to both you and anyone that we're aware of who wants to know about outdoor, indoor, and on-premise consumption. With regard to if people are not able to get their questions answered, we're asking them to play it conservatively in terms of complying with the clear language of the ordinances. And please feel free to get a hold of us at the legal department, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can with, clarifications and
thank you,
answers
George.
to your questions.
And George, when you send that to Tyler, could you please copy me on that so that
Sure.
I have at least the
We will.
the
and of
latest
course, get the
updates on this.
BPD
So,
that as well.
because it
We
won't
want
be
the police
just,
to
it won't just be Tyler who's asking. I mean, many have asked that
Sure.
question, and I do remember having the conversation with maybe even Tyler, but certainly Butch with Reality Bites last summer about this. And so that's obviously very
Wanna make sure
legitimate
I'm in
questions.
compliance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Anything else, Tyler? I'm sorry, you still had I think you said it had about 60 seconds.
No, I just said I want to be in compliance, and thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Thanks for all you do, and we appreciate your presence not only in Bloomington but also in Normal. Thank you.
Yep.
At this point, I'm going to just touch base very quickly. Any parting thoughts by our liquor commissioners? I'm going to start with Mr. Jordan and then Commissioner Powell. Commissioner Jordan.
I guess my question would be, does the current license holders that are present understand what your goals and objectives are concerning how it affects their business and what's expected of them? If there's going to be enforcement taken, I think we need to know that in advance.
Right. Well, I think that's a good point, and maybe Mr. Boyle, if you could clarify, but essentially what we're saying is, Mr. Boyle, go ahead.
Here, it's and Mayor, of course, you can correct or supplement, but my understanding is that we had felt that with respect, first of all, any of the mask-related things that we've been enforcing since Labor Day will remain in effect to the extent that they're pertinent. And I guess the reason I'm saying to the extent that they're pertinent is that we're also going to be enforcing these executive orders going forward. One of them is no consumption on the premises. So if we have, people inside a place where there is only a premises, in other words, no outdoor consumption, and they're in there consuming, that's going to be a violation of our ordinance relating to health and safety. I understand there may be some differences of opinion about that, but we want to clarify that, yes, we do think that that is enforceable, and we will be enforcing it going forward, in addition to the public health-related face covering rule. Similarly, the rule or the executive order that establishments will be closed by 11 p.m. Going forward, we want to clear up confusion. Those will be enforced through liquor enforcement proceedings. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. And again, if there are questions with respect to particular establishments, particular situations, and so on, please feel free to contact the legal department with them. We'll do all we can to give you guidance and assistance and answers.
That clarify things, Commissioner Jordan?
Yes, other than the people that are present, do they have any questions regarding what Mr. Boyle just reiterated?
Well, if they do, well, at this point, since we have exhausted, we're moved beyond public comment, we're going to ask them to just contact Mr. Boyle.
All right.
And our legal department, or me, that's fine as well, of course.
Okay.
Commissioner Powell.
I would just say that it is important to understand because we're heading into what is the last weekend for the college students coming up this weekend. And next week, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, is one of the biggest drinking holidays of the year. So I think it's important to understand, what we are going to do to enforce that, people need to wear masks, social distance, and just be safe.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. At this point, any last words, Mr. Boyle, before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
George, I have just a quick question.
If you do, I'm sorry, Mr. Bentley, but technically we are, well, I will bend the rules slightly here if it's very, very quick. Mr. Bentley.
George, so on the mask order, which is 69.0.50, we know that, and the other one for congregating. If you're inside establishment, you say there's an ordinance, so you guys are passing an ordinance, or there is an ordinance that you'll be writing the violation on if someone's consuming inside the establishment?
If someone is consuming inside the establishment, and you and I spoke at this at some length, sir, they're in violation of the executive order that precludes consumption inside the premises.
Okay, it's not a city ordinance yet. It's just the executive order. That's what I want to clarify.
Well, here's how it's a city. Hold on. Here's how it's a city ordinance. Chapter 6, Section 37E4 requires all liquor licensees to comply with health and safety regulations and with all codes for health and safety pertinent in the city of Bloomington. Our belief, being in the state of Illinois, is that the gubernatorial emergency orders that have been upheld by the courts are pertinent health and safety regulations in the city of Bloomington, and we will enforce them accordingly through our liquor code. So that's the ordinance that's relevant. Chapter 6, Section 37E4.
Okay, and if you have any further questions, Mr. Bentley, please contact us. Mr. Boyle, any last words before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
Nothing further.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Moved by Commissioner Jordan, a second.
A second.
Commissioner Powell, Madam, we're not going to call the roll then. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Thank you very much, and thank you all for attending. Obviously, we all wish it was under a different set of circumstances. I don't think anybody wants this. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Boyle.